Things start to get crazy when you think like this. Have you ever felt like you're always choosing the lesser evil? That even when it seems like you're doing the right thing, something inside you whispers that something's off. Like you're settling for less than you deserve, but can't quite explain why? Have you ever caught yourself trying to justify a choice that, deep down, hurts? As if the fear of losing was stronger than the desire to be happy? Maybe your mind is working against you, without you even realizing it. Maybe you're living under invisible influences, old voices, repeated patterns, expectations that aren't even yours. What if what you call rational thinking is actually a silent trap, built from old fears and unfair comparisons? This video is an invitation, not to think more, but to think differently, to observe the way you think, feel, and decide. Because sometimes it's the overthinking itself that keeps us trapped. And the path to clarity isn't about finding quick answers, but about facing the paradoxes with courage and awareness. It all starts when someone says, "This is a great deal," and you believe it. Not because you thought deeply about what it means for you, but because you compared it to what was shown before. A higher price, a tougher situation, a subtler threat. That's the anchor effect in action. The mind latches onto the first reference point and starts measuring everything from there, even if that point is completely artificial. And the anchor doesn't always come from an ad or a manipulative conversation. Sometimes it comes from within, from a childhood where love was scarce, and now you accept crumbs as if they were feasts. From a culture that says being chosen is enough reason to feel grateful, even if what's being offered is shallow, toxic, or incomplete. The cruelest part is that this comparison isn't always conscious. You think you're making rational decisions, but really, you're just trying not to feel rejected. You keep a job that's making you sick, because compared to unemployment, it seems better than nothing. You stay in a lukewarm relationship, because compared to loneliness, it seems less bad. And just like that, you slowly start adapting to discomfort, and calling it maturity. But the real value isn't in what's presented first. It's hidden in the subtext of what you feel, in the quiet discomfort, in the intuition that says, "This isn't fair to you." And ignoring that inner voice is often the first step toward accepting a life that doesn't nurture you. It takes courage to pull up the anchor, to break the comparison, to look at an offer, a relationship, or an opportunity and ask, does this have value on its own, or does it only seem good when compared to something worse? Freedom begins when you realize that fear should never be the standard. Respect for yourself should be. You wake up with an idea in your head and swear it was your own. But was it really? How many times has a choice, a taste, or even a deep desire come from something someone planted in you without you noticing? Sometimes it's from a commercial, a long-ago family conversation, or constant social comparisons you don't even register anymore. These are tiny, almost invisible stimuli that slowly shape what you believe to be personal choices. The truth is, many of the decisions we make daily are automatic responses to suggestions that were planted inside us. Some are external, like the behavioral norms imposed by society. Others are internal, like the fears we've carried since early on. And the most dangerous part is that over time, we stop questioning whether what we want is truly ours, or just a desperate attempt to fit in. Jung called this the collective unconscious, a set of images, ideas, and impulses passed down through generations, forming an invisible backdrop that influences how we think, love, and suffer. You might think you're making choices of your own free will, but in reality, you're just responding to a pattern you've learned to follow without realizing it. And that's when things start to go wrong. Because when you live guided by inherited desires, eventually, a void shows up. A discomfort you can't name, but that makes you feel something's off. You get what you thought you wanted, but you don't feel fulfilled. You follow a path, but deep down, it doesn't feel like yours. And no matter how much you try to adjust your course, everything always feels just slightly out of place. It's hard to stop and look at this honestly, because realizing that something you've always wanted might not have come from you is scary. But it's also freeing, because from that point on, you can start building a truer desire, a more authentic path. And even if there's still doubt, at least it will be your own, not one imposed by a system that thinks for you. In the beginning, everything feels magical. The other person has a unique glow, a presence that draws you in. a voice that captivates. And it's exactly that initial charm that can make you overlook the first signs of disrespect. Small behaviors that bother you, but you brush off because you're still under the spell of admiration. This is known as the halo effect, when a good first impression makes us see the whole person as positive, even when the details tell a different story. This phenomenon is common in relationships. You meet someone, get captivated, create an idealized image, and from that moment on, you start justifying everything that doesn't make sense. Absence becomes needed space. Coldness becomes a more reserved personality. Indifference becomes a fear of getting too close. And little by little, day after day, you convince yourself that it's worth holding on. Even if you're losing your peace, it's even harder for those who feel deeply. Because when a bond is formed, it comes with hope. Hope that the other person will change. That the behavior is just a phase. That the affection will come back the way it was in the beginning. But that bright beginning often doesn't return, because it was never solid. It was a projected image, either yours or theirs, held together by neediness, expectation, or a deep longing to be seen and accepted. The mind tries to protect the heart by creating explanations, and the heart tries to protect the mind by pretending there's still love. But deep down, what really exists is fear. Fear of leaving. Fear of admitting that something that once felt so right has now become a prison. Recognizing this hurts, but ignoring it hurts even more. Because you start doubting yourself. You begin to think you're asking for too much, feeling too much, expecting too much. When in reality, you just wanted something simple. Respect, care, presence. It's not weakness to admit that love is over, or that maybe it was never love at all. It's emotional maturity. It's the decision to step out of illusion and face what's really happening, without the filter of enchantment. Because that initial glow can blind you, but it can also be a sign that it's time to open your eyes. Not every attachment comes from love. Sometimes it comes from repetition, from seeing the same person every day, from hearing the same voice, from replying to the same messages, even when they no longer bring you peace. Affection, over time, can stop being a living feeling and turn into a habit. And the hardest part is realizing when that happens, because the familiar holds a silent power. It soothes, even when it no longer fulfills. There's a phenomenon called the mere exposure effect. The more often you're exposed to something or someone, the greater the chance you'll form an emotional bond, even if that bond no longer makes real sense. You get used to the presence, to the routine, to the automatic gestures, and you start mistaking familiarity for connection. But not everything that stays is good for you. Not everything that's close truly cares for you. Many relationships survive this way, out of habit, out of fear of starting over, out of the illusion that the time spent together is enough reason to stay. But time alone doesn't sustain affection. What sustains it is care, listening, and genuine presence. When those fade, what's left is a fragile bond, held together by memories of what once was, and the difficulty of admitting that it no longer is. The pain of leaving something familiar is real. It's uncomfortable to walk away from a place where you already know the rules, even if those rules hurt you. And many times, you stay. Because silence feels more bearable than absence. Because the emptiness left after leaving seems scarier than the sadness that comes from staying. But that repeated attachment, if not questioned, becomes a cycle. A pattern that repeats in other relationships, other situations, until you finally have the courage to bring it into consciousness. Jung talked about this. Unconscious patterns keep repeating until they are made conscious. And only when you understand why you've stayed can you truly choose to leave. Letting go of what was once comfortable takes strength. But staying where you're no longer seen also comes at a cost. And over time, that cost becomes too high to ignore. Sometimes everything inside you screams that something is wrong. But instead of accepting the discomfort, you rush to find justifications. You read the signs selectively, ignore what hurts, and cling to exceptions as if they were rules. That's the confirmation bias at work. The unconscious impulse to seek only what supports what you want to believe, even when the facts say otherwise. This happens a lot in relationships. You notice that the person treats you with indifference, that the conversations are always shallow, that support never comes. But then there's a kind gesture, a message out of the blue, a small reminder, and that's enough to soothe your fear. You take that fragment and turn it into proof that things might still work out, even if, in practice, it's just an exception in a sea of neglect. The mind becomes an accomplice in self-deception when you're afraid to face the real pain, because admitting that something is wrong might mean losing what little is left. And for many people, the fear of loneliness is more paralyzing than the sadness of staying in a place where they're not loved. So thinking becomes a defense mechanism. You overthink, overanalyze, create theories and explanations just to avoid feeling what's already screaming in silence. But overthinking doesn't always mean clarity. Sometimes it's just a form of escape, a desperate attempt to control what can't be controlled. And in that pursuit of understanding, you drift further away from your own intuition. That feeling in your body, that unease that shows up when something's off, it all gets ignored in the name of an ideal you keep trying to keep alive. The first step to breaking that cycle is to stop justifying the unjustifiable. It's to accept that the discomfort has a reason, that the feeling that something is wrong isn't weakness. It's a warning, and that sometimes thinking more won't bring answers. What's missing is the courage to honestly feel what's hurting. It's easy to see other people's mistakes. We point them out, analyze them, give advice. But when it comes to looking at our own, our vision fails. There's a mechanism called the blind spot bias, our tendency to believe we're more rational, fair, and self-aware than we really are. While we quickly spot distortions in others, we ignore our own, as if we were immune. This happens because acknowledging our own mistakes hurts. It forces us to face the parts of ourselves that are still immature, defensive, or wounded. And often, out of pride or fear, we avoid that confrontation. We'd rather believe we're always acting logically and fairly, even when our behavior says otherwise. We create justifications, downplay our actions, change the subject. Anything to avoid facing an uncomfortable truth about ourselves. Montaigne once said that a true wise person is one who knows how to doubt themselves. And Jung emphasized that clarity doesn't come from denying the shadow, but from recognizing it. But to reach that point, you need humility. You need to stop hiding behind constant explanations and start listening to what's being emotionally denied. Often, our rigidity toward others is just a way to avoid looking at our own flaws. The greatest trap of the blind spot bias is that it feeds the illusion of superiority. You believe you see things more clearly than others, when in reality, you're just avoiding what threatens you internally. And this kind of emotional blindness comes at a high price. Repeated behaviors, frustrated relationships, poorly made decisions, and above all, stagnation. Recognizing that you also fail doesn't make you weak. It makes you more human, more aware, more capable of change. Clarity begins when you understand that you're not above making mistakes, and that everyone, including you, needs constant self-observation to avoid falling into internal traps. A lot of people believe they're in control of their own mind, that they think for themselves, feel logically, make clear decisions. But that's a comfortable illusion. The truth is, much of what you feel, choose, or reject happens beyond your conscious awareness. These are automatic thoughts, old impulses, emotions that show up without warning, and often shape decisions you believe were made rationally. It's like trying to understand a system while you're inside it. You see parts, try to organize ideas, search for coherence. But the movement began before you even noticed. And the more you try to make sense of everything using only rational thought, the further you drift from the real complexity of the mind. Jung said we're influenced by symbols, unconscious forces, and emotional patterns that live within us without our awareness. The mind is far bigger than what we can put into words. There's a psychic world working constantly, even when we think we're just reflecting. And many times when we feel stuck, insecure, or confused, it's not because we lack answers, but because we're trying to solve with logic what can't be solved with logic alone. There's a difference between awareness and access. You can know you're anxious, but not understand where it's coming from. You can notice you're repeating patterns in your relationships, but can't break them through willpower alone. That's where the importance of becoming a self-observer comes in. Noticing what you feel without judgment, recognizing the cycles that keep repeating, creating space for the unconscious to reveal itself. not as something mystical, but as a real part of what drives you. Accepting that not everything is controllable is the first step toward developing a clearer mind. Because total control doesn't exist. What does exist is growing awareness, and that only comes with presence, inner listening, and a willingness to investigate what moves you beyond words. For a long time, certain patterns of thought and behavior were essential for survival. Judging quickly, reacting with suspicion, avoiding the unknown. These made sense when the world was more dangerous and threats were physical, visible. But today, those same mental strategies become obstacles. They create internal conflict, feed anxiety, and block relationships that require more emotional presence than instinctive defense. It's what we can call evolutionary blindness, mechanisms that once worked well, but now cause suffering because they haven't adapted to today's emotional sensitivity. For example, the instinct to protect yourself at all costs can turn into isolation. The tendency to compare yourself to others can become constant anguish. The habit of mistrusting everything can prevent real connections from forming. For people who are more perceptive, this conflict is even more intense. You pick up on the atmosphere, catch subtle intentions, notice contradictions that most people ignore. And that's exhausting. It feels like you're always one emotional step ahead, but also one step more isolated. It's hard to react lightly when everything in you is connected to what's unspoken, what's unclear, what hurts even without a defined form. The problem is that the world around you still runs at a different pace. It values practicality, speed, quick answers. And when you start questioning all of that, it feels like you're the one who's wrong. As if thinking deeply is a flaw. As if feeling deeply is too much. But it's not. What's out of place is the structure that doesn't match the complexity of those who perceive more profoundly. Recognizing that many of our judgments are inherited from a past that no longer fits is essential for growth. It's not about erasing our instincts, but updating them. Understanding that some ways of reacting no longer protect, they only push others away. And that real emotional maturity lies in realizing when a defense mechanism has become a barrier against life itself. Not everything needs to be understood. Not everything can be controlled. And accepting that, although uncomfortable at first, is one of the deepest forms of clarity. There is real power in pausing, in observing what's happening inside and outside of you without rushing to fix it, explain it, or change it. Sometimes, what you need most isn't an answer. It's a moment of stillness. Many people confuse clarity with having all the answers. They think knowing what to do at all times is a sign of wisdom. But in truth, those who see more deeply are the first to admit how much they don't know. They understand the limits of human comprehension, that the mind fails, that the inner world doesn't always align with external logic. Socrates said it centuries ago, knowing that you don't know is the first step to wisdom. Jung also said that true transformation begins when we admit what we don't understand, when we stop fighting the unknown and start listening to it. Because there are experiences that can't be explained with words. There are feelings that don't need names to be real. And there are wounds that only begin to heal when we stop trying to control them and simply allow them to exist. Accepting your own limits isn't weakness, it's a sign of emotional maturity. You don't need to have all the answers to keep going, and often, you'll only find clarity after you've accepted the confusion. The problem is, that goes against everything we've been taught. From a young age, we're pressured to decide quickly, to appear strong, to fake confidence. But there's a quiet power in saying, I don't know, but I'm here, present, watching. Clarity isn't speed, it's depth. It's the willingness to look inward even when you don't understand everything. And it's in that space of humility that something new can arise. Not a perfect explanation, but a more whole presence. And with that, the chance to live more lightly, more honestly, more consciously. Not everything that's true needs to be logical, and not every deep thought leads to a conclusion. Sometimes, what matures within us is precisely the ability to endure paradox, to live with ideas that contradict each other without trying to force them into neat formulas. Growing up, in many cases, means letting go of the need to be right and embracing the discomfort of not knowing for sure. Many people believe that deep thinking is about finding answers, but in truth, the most transformative thoughts usually don't resolve anything. They open things up. They expand. and they demand from you a more patient, less anxious kind of listening. It's as if the mind stops being a machine for conclusions and becomes a field of observation, a place where you learn to look at yourself, others, and the world with more inner space. Jung valued this mindset, the attitude of someone who doesn't lock themselves into certainties but walks between opposites. Because within us, there is conflict, love and anger, courage and fear, the desire for closeness and the need for distance. And trying to resolve all of this with logic alone is to deny the ambiguous nature of human experience. What frees us is not the right answer. It's the act of honestly looking at the contradiction. It's necessary to develop the art of self-observation, to notice your thoughts like someone watching a river flow, without forcing conclusions, without judging every feeling that comes up, without identifying with everything that shows up in your mind. This kind of thinking about your own thinking, is one of the highest expressions of inner freedom, because it allows you to act with greater awareness instead of just reacting to automatic impulses. Those who learn to live with paradox carry themselves more lightly, because they understand that life was never meant to fit into neat labels, and that part of wisdom lies in accepting that not everything will be resolved. But even so, it's still possible to move forward, with presence, with clarity, and with a more mature curiosity for what's still to come. There are moments when thinking is no longer an exercise in clarity, but a defense mechanism. The mind goes into constant motion, spins in circles, replays scenes, projects possibilities, as if searching for an explanation were the only way not to fall apart. But excessive thinking isn't always clarity. Often, it's desperation, a quiet cry for help when the body already feels, but the mind refuses to admit it. People who feel deeply do this often. They think because they feel, and they think so much just to avoid coming into contact with what's hurting. Logic becomes shelter. Analysis becomes armor, because it's more bearable to rationalize than to admit you're hurt, rejected, exhausted. And slowly, this way of functioning settles in. You live trying to understand the world so you can protect yourself from it. But understanding isn't the same as embracing, and over-rationalizing can distance you from your own heart. This kind of mental exhaustion can't be fixed with more information. It's not a lack of reading or intelligence. It's emotional effort gone in the wrong direction. What needs to be heard isn't the argument. It's the pain buried underneath it. What needs attention is the body that freezes, the chest that tightens, the sleep that doesn't come. These are the signs that call for presence, not more thinking. You don't need to find all the causes to feel what you feel. And you don't need to understand everything to validate your own pain. Sometimes, stopping the thoughts is the first step toward finally starting to feel. With honesty, with courage. Without fear of discovering that, deep down, what you needed most wasn't an answer. It was an internal embrace. Seeing deeply comes with a cost. When you begin to notice the world's contradictions, people's haste, the lack of true listening in relationships, it's common to feel out of place. You try to talk, and people call you complicated. You try to be honest, and they say you're dramatic. You try to go deep, and they treat you like you're strange. Superficiality has become the norm, and those who see beyond it often suffer in silence. That loneliness of the lucid isn't arrogance, it's a consequence of seeing what many prefer to ignore, of not being able to laugh at things that aren't funny, of not being able to accept what is unfair, of not being able to pretend everything is fine when it clearly isn't. And that wears you down. Because at the same time that you want to protect yourself, you also feel that there's beauty in what you see, even when no one else sees it. There is a quiet suffering in being deep in a world that celebrates the shallow. But there's also power in it. Because clarity, although difficult, brings freedom. You stop going with the flow just for the sake of it. You stop repeating what no longer makes sense. You start choosing more consciously, stepping away from what feels empty, forming deeper connections, even if they're fewer in number. Jung said becoming conscious is a painful process, but it's the only way to live with integrity. And that means accepting your condition of being different, of not fully belonging, of sometimes being the one who thinks too much, feels too much, observes too much. But it's also through all of that, that you build a life more aligned with what truly matters. You don't need to fit into a superficial world to have worth. Sometimes, it's precisely your clarity that lights the way for someone still trying to make sense of what they're feeling. And even in silence, that is already a way of caring for the world. Things start to get crazy when you think with fear, with urgency, or while trying to protect yourself from pain. But everything begins to change when you think with presence, and have the courage to feel what the mind tried to hide.